But thank you so much for joining Spacestor this afternoon in this discussion around the post-COVID workplace. So I thought we'd kick off with a brief introduction to the panelists we have with us today, so you can understand our background, the insights that we bring to this conversation. And I think we were just discussing this yesterday. I think the point of today was to generate some lively debate, some good conversations, some exchanging of alternative views and alternate views. So we'd love to engage with you as our audience to join in, put in any questions that you have, any thoughts that you have around this whole topic as we're going through the discussion today into the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom. And we will endeavour to respond to those. I don't know if we can promise to provide answers, and I think we have already agreed that we're going to emerge from this with more questions than we do answers, but hopefully we can at least share some insights from our own perspective. So George, can I ask you to introduce yourself? We have George Muir from Udal, Cuain.
Good afternoon, good morning, hello. Yes, my name is George. You can tell from my accent, I'm a very good Swedish guy. I've lived in Sweden for over 30 years. I worked for that big Swedish furniture company for a long time. But I'm actually from Scotland from the beginning, hence the name of the company, Udal Cuain. I'm actually what's called a futurist. I spend most of my time talking about the future, but just now I'm not. I'm actually not talking about the future. I'm actually thinking about what do we need to do to get there, because there is nobody has the actual ideas. My history is long and varied. I've started off at IKEA building up East Europe to working in the design company, but basically the last part of my life at IKEA was describing the future workplace and a great place to work for IKEA. So it's been an interesting journey. And after 30 years, I decided to go on my own and do lots of keynote speeches and advising companies. And I've talked to many companies around the world, and I have a lot of companies I'm talking to just now. I'm really working towards a different way of thinking. And really, this is one of the things I'll come up with today, is that I will have an alternative view to most people. But what I'm kind of wary of just now is there's an awful lot of information going out by many companies to many people, and it really doesn't make sense. So I'm working to try to take the lead with a number of experts around the world to create a coalition of the convinced, which is really experts in different areas thinking about different things and pushing each other's questions around, so that when companies really want a question or have a question, we can then discuss how to formulate that question further forward. So I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm looking forward to coming up with some crazy ideas.
That's great, thanks George, appreciate it. And then we have Basia Dzaman from the Spacestor Digital Transformation team. Basia, can you just briefly introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Baxter, and I'm an industrial designer and developer. My previous work included process automation, robotics, and computational design. I've been working for Spacestor for 4 years now, and amongst other things, I'm responsible for researching and delivering innovation projects, such as our digital transformation. Personally, I think it's a great time for design, specifically with a human-centered approach. And this applies as much to countries as to individual organizations. In terms of impact, I think we're going to see an increase in intensity of some of the changes that are already happening, problems that we are already facing, but also solutions that we're already developing.
That's great, thanks Basia. And then we also have Rob Atkinson from IA Interior Architects. Rob, could you just introduce?
Sure. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As said, my name's Rob Atkinson. Like George, I've got a very varied design career in everything from retail banking through to dealing with residential work, but majority of my career has been on the commercial spectrum, and it's creating live, engaging, branded environments that people can actually call home, and that can create a connection both with internal and external audiences. So my current role is within IA. IA is one of the leading practices in workplace interiors, and we're concerned with our clients within primarily the technology sector, financial services, as well as other specialized services. Some of these are bricks and mortar environments, so everybody is located to an environment. Others, we take a more strategic view and understand that organizations are more distributed. So we can create environments that can create a home for those kinds of organizations, but also provide the flexibility and the agility to cope with a changing environment. And increasingly, what I think we're going to be seeing is changes that not necessarily organizationally, but perhaps culturally. Every kind of behavior is changing on the basis of information that's available. So what we're going to see more in the future is organizations that are potentially far more agile, not necessarily location-based, but that have an adaptive capacity that utilizes the best in terms of technology, facilities, communication, and software.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for joining us today. And we have from Spacestor, Nick Baxter. Nick, could you give us an intro?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, very pleased to co-chair this with you. And my role is MD in Spacestor UK, but my global role is strategic marketing and really making sure we deliver what we say in our mantra of California cool plus London design. So we're always looking at that innovative, creative, effective, cutting edge influence, as well as the big societal shifts and trends and the ways of working, workplace trends. So that's very much aligned with our discussion today, and very pleased to be on this panel and to welcome our visiting panelists. And give us an intro to yourself, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, so just to introduce myself, my name's Alex Harvey, VP of Sales with Spacestor. Very similar to what you were saying there, Nick, the clients that we work with on a global basis across the UK, across Europe, across the United States in particular, across a very broad and varied set of industry verticals, but similar to what Rob was describing, a lot of tech companies that we work with, a lot of financial and banking organizations, and trying to work and understand the big drivers behind the workplaces they create is a big part of my role. So not just what furniture do you want, but what do you want this workplace to do for you culturally? And we're clearly seeing a huge shift around our lives right now in the short term, but we're also going to see a big long-term impact of this whole global pandemic, and that's going to have a significant impact on workplace. I think everyone we're talking to and listening to is saying there will be an impact, and what we'd like to discuss today is what will those impacts be, what can we do to influence them, what do we need to look out and listen to. So thanks very much for joining us. This is the Spacestor Insights Live panel discussion if you've just joined us, and I'm discussing with my co-panelists the whole subject of the post-COVID workplace. So let's jump in, and as we've said already, please do contribute through the Q&A box with any questions that occur to you, any comments you'd like to share or debate with the panelists. So first of all, one for you, George, to get the ball rolling. We hear a lot of speculation, some ideas and opinions being circulated around what does the future look like, and as a futurist, I'm sure that's something you're well used to dealing with and discussing. And we're hearing some quite bold predictions coming from various people, but how far can we really predict the future in the kind of discussion we're having today?
Well, we can't. To be super clear in one word, we can't predict the future because we don't have enough data of what's going on. That's number one point. Anybody who's actually making a prediction is really being foolish. and I don't mean that politically, even though you can take it that way if you want to. But the main part of this just now is that there's been an awful lot of data discussed how we've got here. And what I'm picking up on is that this is not the end. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to go through this, and we're going to go through this a number of times. So one of the things that I think we need to be talking about is just planning back to work. What does that really mean? What does it mean from a humanistic perspective? What does it mean from a business perspective? What does it mean from a space perspective, or regulations, environmental perspective? Even getting to work is going to be a challenge. And I know that people have been putting some ideas out there, but you know, if anybody thinks that they're going to be back to work in 6 weeks, then it's going to be a challenge. It's really going to be a challenge. And what we've been noticing is that the people who are talking about going back to work are really not thinking about the whole picture. I'm lucky I live in Sweden, where we don't have lockdown. And my wife told me today, she was at lunch picking some stuff up at the chemist, and there was an 81-year-old woman standing in front of her who was doing her shopping in the shopping mall. And I was going, oh wow, that's kind of weird. I think it's weird for the rest of the world as well that this is actually happening. So the challenges is going to be, how is this going to look like? There's going to be people who love working from home, and there's going to be people who hate working from home. There's going to be people who's going to be having to work in a building, and there's going to be people who say, I'm not ever going to go back into a building again. So there are too many unknowns to actually put this in place. And so it's going to be difficult to put what is the future. What I can honestly say is the future is that it's not today. It's not how it was. It is going to be a new future. It's going to be something completely different. And I've been talking about that type of work for the last 5-10 years, about the fact that the businesses will be more fractalized, that communities need to start to come into play, and we're seeing a little bit more caring community. And we're also starting to get more free time and thinking about what's our lives all about. So there's going to be a lot of different things, and there is not one size fits all. There's going to be a lot of backlash. I was talking to somebody in Minnesota 2 days ago, and they were saying, this is all fake news. Let's get back to work now. And it's like, huh? But then again, maybe from their side, it is fake news. Maybe that's the way it is. Maybe they're needing to be able to go back to work. I think there's a difference, a huge difference between people who work in an office place to people who's going to work in a factory, or people who's going to work in a building site or everything. So these situations will change as well. So really, to predict the future is really being, the only thing you can say it's going to be different. That's the major challenge here.
So there's a lot in your response there. I'd be interested, Rob, in your thoughts on that, in terms of the role that architecture and interior design has to play. I guess by its nature, a lot of what you're doing in your work is creating something that is designed to be there for the longer term. So how do you accommodate those potential changes that George has been describing?
Well, we're a service sector, so obviously we're working together with any kind of companies that are out there, and it's clear that for many kind of industries, ones that were already under transformation anyway, either through organizational structure or in response to artificial intelligence, they're going to see a lot more of those changes accelerated. But without appearing too alarmist, there is going to be an economic fallout to this virus, and there's going to be a series of disruptions across all industries, even though some of those might be a little bit unbalanced. If you think about everything from extraction of raw materials, production processes, through to transportation and construction, these are all industries that we touch in our business in some ways. Now, it's kind of interesting to look at, say, Sweden as an example, because some countries and territories haven't had any kind of anticipation of that, or minimal. and while others are currently allowing for a bit more of a staged reintroduction of different skill sectors. So a lot of the time, how they respond to that is dependent upon how seriously a lot of employers are taking risk factors and what their level of preparedness is for it. And a lot of the time, they're starting by putting new operational rules in place. And a lot of those rules are just going to influence culture and mindset. However, there's others who are looking at the fact that they're saying, we don't necessarily need to change organizationally, we just culturally need to accommodate a little bit more agility within our organization, because we know that a similar disruption like this is going to take place. And for us, the biggest outlay that we've got as an organization is our staff. They're our asset. Our asset shouldn't be just the bricks and mortar in which we gather everybody there. It should be the people that are working in our environments. How do we create optimal opportunities for them to collaborate together? What kind of technology can we use to support them? And how can we ensure that it's cost effective and can be easily upgraded or upscaled should the needs of a business change, or should we need to be able to respond to another crisis that occurs in the future? So flexibility is the watchword. And for us as an organization, we'd love to be able to say, yes, we have the answer. But in fact, as George alluded to, I don't think anybody's really got the answer just yet. So we've got to be listening. We've got to be communicating with other specialists in other fields, but also we need to be observing what the new needs are going to be amongst our client groups, as well as in other sectors, how our design skills can best support those sectors to operationally get back to some semblance of a new normal.
It's an interesting point you were just making, Rob, and I was just thinking of the point we've been at today, or we were at 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago. The workplace didn't arrive at that point in one step. It was an evolutionary process that's taken many years with many different influences and factors, both social, economic, technological. There's many factors that have gone into creating the workplaces like they are today, and I think the evolution that's restarting now and is being massively influenced by the current global pandemic and the health crisis. I'm just wondering, do you see that as just as another wheel in that entire cycle, or is that a completely fresh, different direction?
No, I'd say there's a number of factors that have been influencing the workplace for a few years now. Wellness is one of them. Just ensuring that 90% of your outlay as an employer is going to be to your employees. So apart from just remunerating your staff really well, you have to give the impression that you're really looking after them. So a well-designed workplace with plenty of facilities that can support their health and their well-being has been an important factor within the workplace environment for for the past 5 to 10 years. But there's other threats that are also emerging on the horizon, like artificial intelligence. How do we begin to integrate that within a workplace environment? What sort of influence is it going to have upon the workplace sector? And you spoke about an evolution, and the evolution is a good way of looking at it, because previously what we've seen is almost like an evolution of the old factory environment, where you had people producing something and you had managers that were sort of monitoring the work that they're doing. Well, what happens when, in an office environment, which is the modern iteration of that, what happens when part of your workforce is dispersed in some ways and managers can't monitor the work that they're doing as effectively? There's a greater degree of agency that a lot more of your employees have. And alongside that agency, you've got to really inject a sense of purpose in terms of what they're doing. You need to create spaces for them to collaborate so that they still feel part of an organization. Now, the question for us is, how's that going to work in the future? Is that going to remain something that is a environment that everybody just congregates to on a 9-to-5 basis? Possibly not. It's possibly going to be an environment where there's going to be some mix of remote working. There's going to be a far greater reliance on collaborative technology where people are in virtual environments. And part of that is also going to be the workplace environment itself, because it's got to be able to form part of that mix, because it creates an environment where not only can you meet clients, but you can also engender a sense of community. And communities, I think, are the kind of real watchword for us, because those are the things that engender loyalty, and those are the things that make people feel part of something bigger than themselves.
That's good. I'll just bring you in, Nick. You got some thoughts around the workplaces and the building of communities, something that we've observed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Building communities, we need them, don't we? We're proving now more than ever the need of community and our contacts. I think you mentioned in a little chat we had prior, Rob, that we need people, don't we? And the different reactions to the situation we're in isn't really defined by maybe age or cohort or a lot of other things. It's really to do with relationships at a high level. I think back to the question of how far we can predict this, I think all would agree, not very far, but it's also got to be intelligent to try and look ahead, hasn't it, as to what will be needed in this. You get the immediate, you might say the immediate violent reaction to a catastrophe, and then a more measured response over time as we get better at dealing with things.
Yeah,
So,
I liked what Rob said, and I think that's something which I think we'd do well to listen to, is that flexibility is going to be so important. I don't think anyone can afford to be rigid in how we respond to this, or, as you say, to try and set the next 5 years strategy, because it's unlikely to be successful. And we've just had a great question come in on the chat from Teresa. So Teresa's asking about some of the resources needed to help with directional signage around new best practices in the office, safety, directional, etc. And then a second point there around having more time to think and the amount of information that's being thrown at us. George, could you give us your thoughts on Teresa's question there?
Well, the first, let me take the second part first, because I think that's a really interesting point for what I've been doing. I spend a lot of time reading, as a futurist, reading and researching and everything else. And this time just now is a really good time for thinking. It's a very, very good time for thinking and looking at this stuff. And as I said at the beginning here, we're getting an awful lot of data or documents thrown to us, specific from consultancy companies who are wanting our monies. And really, they're not giving us anything new. It's really, they haven't gone through the experience. The people in the buildings industry and the people who are in the offices and the HR and the leaders, they've gone through that part there. So the experience is actually in the communities today. And what I think needs to happen is people need to sit down and think about, in the form of what's happened now, what do we need to plan to get back to work? How are we going to execute that? How are we going to follow up on that? And then how are we going to prepare for the next part, because it's going to happen again. And throughout those stages, talk about continuous learning. And then think about from also different aspects, from the business leadership or the business strategy perspective, from the employee, the co-worker perspective, from basically the workplace itself, whether that's a building or whether it's a WeWork or whether it's working from home, and all the different things inside it. And then, of course, the technology part, which is really going to be interesting. That's going to move forward, specifically if you've actually used IoT or touchless devices just now or thinking about it. So I think there's a huge opportunity to bring in new technologies. But the thing is that work on your own experience, use your own experience, use your own ways of working to move through there. I'm a little bit scared of the CFOs of this world, the money crunchers or whatever, thinking about the fact, well, we've lost a hell of a lot of money over the last few months. How are we going to build that back up again and forget about maybe people? Or also think about the actual process in the building or and the company going, well, I don't need to have everybody in the office because I can save so much money by them not being in the office and saying you're working from home and not thinking about the teams and the way of working and everything else. What I've noticed, and coming from a rather long HR background, is HR's been missing over the last 3 months, and I don't know what they're doing. What I see happening is people who have been working with writing policies and regulations and enforcing regulations in the workplace coming to the front. So they're really coming because they're working on practical experience. So practicality, simple ways of working. I don't think that like putting a sign to say one-way direction around an office is going to work. I don't even know if people are going to come back to office very quickly. I think it's going to be slow but sure. Again, as I said, in Sweden, we don't have a lockdown, but people are being encouraged to work from home. My wife works for the crisis team for IKEA, and she's sitting in the office every second week, and there are three people in the boardroom running the crisis team. Also, one sitting at one end of the board table, one at the other end, and one in the middle. This week, people are starting to come back to the office because they're missing talking to people. So there's a humanistic perspective, which is going to come into people wanting to come back. But if you're going to move 4,000 people back to an activity-based workplace, I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So you have to think about the staggering strategies, what we're going to work with, and everything else. So there's the safety aspects is really going to be the challenge right now, but that's not the main challenge. But it's going to be the first one people look at. Is my air pollution good? Is my air circuitry good? Is my toilets clean? Is my desk cleans and everything else? These are going to be the first things that come into play, but that's just touching the tip of the iceberg.
So there needs to be an immediate reaction to make people feel safe, really, is what we're saying. But there's going to be a huge amount of learning and flexibility that's going to happen along the way.
It's complex. Even, as I said before, think about trying to walk into an office. If you've got, and 8 weeks ago you had 100 people coming in an hour, or 1,000 people coming in an hour, and now you're going to have to stagger them one every 30 seconds. How are you going to do that? How are you going to clean them? How are you going to make sure that they're safe? There are so many hows and so many questions. So what you need to do is to sit down and think about how people work and go through all these different things. But you're going to be in a frame of economics. Everybody's going to be stuck in that economic frames. And unfortunately, the majority of companies are going to go bust. A huge amount of companies are going to go bust because they don't have the reserves to keep this going.
What would you say, Rob, from your experience? We talked a little bit about safety and directional kind of wayfinding. I know we're hearing from a lot of clients that we're going to see some kind of makeshift solutions happening as we go back in the office, whenever that is. Some duct tape on the floor, some awful looking screens dividing between different desks. But then I think there's going to be a longer term solution that's going to have to be perhaps a bit more thoughtful, perhaps a bit more considered.
So if we are looking at a long-term, there are people already looking at long-term solutions. I hesitate to use the term a long-term solution, because really what they're doing is they're adapting to the current situation. So you've probably seen doing the rounds at the moment, the new 6-foot office, which was great. I mean, it was answering a brief that nobody had ever had before. And they responded really quickly to the brief. My question is, that brief might only be for a protracted period of time of like 6 to 18 months. What happens after that period? There's protocols that you'll have in place. Maybe you'll have some software that's designed to support it. Like, can you imagine your phone buzzing when somebody comes within a 2-meter distance of you? I can imagine there'll be a lot of solutions, and I use that term in inverted commas, to overcome this temporary hump that we're in. But actually, as it pertains to the workplace, you have to design a workplace that is flexible enough to actually deal with the situation that you're currently in, understanding that the only constant that you're going to be confronting is uncertainty. And I'd like to pause that just there, because the uncertainty doesn't just exist within the organization itself. It's operational capacity, it's economic downturn, but there's going to be other repercussions as well. How's this going to affect the real estate market, the commercial real estate market? Is it going to drive the same demand that it did before? And what is the criteria then going to be? I imagine that for the emphasis on a lot more property owners and property developers even is, as at a prerequisite, they need to build in a lot more wellness and sustainability standards to ensure that you could reach this point where you have a secure entry point, and should there be a coronavirus-like situation occurring in the future, you could kind of seal all the hatches and batten yourself in, and you're safe within this environment. There could be a lot more of that happening, in which case the emphasis is going to be a lot more on the mechanical services and how you're drawing fresh air in and what the air quality is around you, as much as it is around the operational movement inside the space. The thing that's underlining it is that you need a structure that can support agility. And for managers, particularly managers that are anxious about how they're going to deal with teams that might expand or contract or might not be necessarily in the building, well, they're going to have to evolve with that same level of uncertainty. Managers like to have certainties. They like to be able to stroll around an office and know what people are doing. And in this coronavirus kind of situation, they've tried to replicate that same process using some relatively crude technology. I'm sure you've all heard of this. You can take, if you're a manager and you have, you've issued kind of laptops to the rest of your workforce, it's your prerogative as a manager to be able to take a photo of their desktop to check that they're not on Facebook. And to me, this is trying to control people rather than giving a level of trust to them. So 2 issues there. The one is the public health issue, which can be mitigated through the design of spaces. 2 has to be organizational, and clearly the way that managers did things in the past has to change, because not only are they going to have to navigate the safety and well-being of their current workforce, they're also going to need to insulate their business against change that's not necessarily viral change, but technological change. So they're going to have to be able to mentor, look after all of their staff, and train them for coming changes that will arise out of AI or other disruptions that are going to be occurring in their specific industry.
Good, thanks, Rob. Basia, you've got some thoughts you could share.
Yes, it's. I just wanted to answer the question that we had in the chat from Dave. What will happen to employers unwilling to accept change and not allow staff to work in different agile ways? They have probably proved work whilst employers have had no choice. And in my opinion, the relationship between the staff and the employers is very important now more than ever. The well-being is no longer a fluffy HR term. It's actually life and death for people. So we already seen the voice of the employees when the employer is not giving the correct regulations and changing the workplace. That can actually cause big implication and like change the way that the brand is seen. And now people can publicly shame certain companies for the way that they responded to the crisis. So all of the companies have to somehow predict. I know we don't have the crystal ball to say what's going to happen, but they can take some measures in order for the employees to feel safe. And it's no longer just the high level end of well-being. It's more like making them feel safe in the environment, giving the right space and the workplace setup.
So as almost always in these conversations, we come back to people. George, you share some thoughts around that question.
There's a challenge here with that point. If you are sitting in with a low income and you have no alternative to work, then it's not so easy to say, sorry, I can't come to the office, because there are people who are, and that's one of the challenges coming out of the States just now, who are on low incomes, who need to start to work, and they want to get back to work. So there's not a one size fits all answer to that thing. I believe that a lot of people say, if you want me to come back to work in the office and it's not safe, then I'm not going to work for you. That's great. Some people will do that. The companies, on the other hand, have to change. And I agree with that partly. If the company doesn't change, they're going to lose out in a big way. But this is a super, it's not a simple question, because there's economics involved, there's business survival involved, and there are people's lives involved, and there are people who are doing things. And I'll give you an example. Going back 20 odd years ago, when I was in Vietnam, there was all these people working on building or making PCBs, boards, electronic boards. And there was a guy at the end of the thing who had a big bowl of acid. In the morning it was super powerful, and in the evening it wasn't so powerful. And he was dipping his hands in there. And he got paid 10 times more than anybody else. And we asked the question, why does he get paid 10 times more? He says, well, he can only work for 3 months, then his hands are burnt, so he can't work anymore. And that was the market economics at that point in time in Vietnam. It's about the ability to work. So this whole thing about coming back to work, it's not just a case of, I'm not coming back because the office doesn't feel safe. It's about, can I afford to come back to work? And if just now in the UK you've been furloughed, a lot of people have been furloughed, so they're getting paid 80%. But that's not happening over here. That's not happening in other countries. And there's people's bank balances going, my company is, I mean, basically it's like this, because there's no money coming in and there's no money going out. It's a challenge for lots of different businesses. This is a problem with this scenario we're talking about just now. The answer is not one-dimensional, it's multi-dimensional, and there are so many dependencies building in everything here. People will come back to work because they want to. People will be told to come back to work because the management are not leaders. Like, I mean, when Rob was talking about managers and having to look at people, that was like 20 years ago for me in Sweden. We've never so different, but I do know that still happens. And so this is actually, this disruption that's coming on here will change society, will change. Well, it's changed the world around, but it will change society. And if we don't think about it from a societal perspective, then we're up with the paddle.
Just to chime in, George, I think that the matter has to be addressed not only by the employees, but also by the government with regulating the safety. And we have to focus on the whole society and everyone in them, not just segments, because everyone is connected now and everybody is equally important.
The challenge with the government, and I agree what you're saying, because they create the regulations, but the governments are only in power for a number of years, and they're only there to make votes. They're not thinking long term, they're only thinking here. So we, as humans, have to stand up and say, this is the way it should be, as opposed to somebody who's got a 3-year tender in the government or a 5-year tender in the government, just trying to gain votes. As you can see in certain, there's an awful lot of politics involved in these questions here. So again, I agree that governments are involved, humans are involved, But as a communities, going back to Robin, we've got this connection about communities. We need to work together, and we need to think about this community way of thinking and helping each other back to how we used to be, and it's not just about money, it's about living.
Yeah, I agree. And if the government is acting slow, we people have to hold them accountable and make them change it.
That's a great thought, George. So we can all make a difference is the point. Nick, you want to chip in? Chaya's made an interesting question there about, will the office become a hub where staff only go to collaborate, have creative team meetings and social events? And I think this chimes in also with something, Rob, you mentioned earlier. I think I see a school of thought that says collaboration and creativity only happens face to face. Is virtual collaboration able to create the same level of creativity and innovation?
I'd like to say yes and no. Yes, it has the capability of being, and no, because although the technology exists, it doesn't necessarily exist in a readily available form. But that's not really saying much. I mean, you only need to go so far back to sort of see how the growth of digital technology, even in terms of the mobile phones that we use, can actually have the ability to do so much more than what we had imagined 10 or 15 years ago. So in terms of collaboration, because if I'm thinking of a layout of an office space, the biggest environments or the biggest real estate which is potentially underutilized are meeting and conference spaces. Because maybe you have a meeting there 2-3 times a week, but it occupies a huge amount of real estate. So there's a lot of technology looking at, say, where you've got client meetings, presentations, shareholder meetings, where they're looking at video collaboration and conferencing using augmented reality. So you can have employees collaborate across the country or even across the world, just using VR headsets. There are some companies who are already developing this technology. So instead of using something like Skype or Slack or Zoom, which is what we're currently using as a kind of a stopgap measure for our remote meetings, you would basically be able to strap on a headset and you'd chat with co-workers in much more of a, albeit virtual, face-to-face setting. And the reason why we like face-to-face settings so much is it's not so much what's said in a meeting when you're looking at somebody, it's all the human nuance that you get from a meeting. It's like that sense of somebody is communicating something to me. Do they really mean that? Or is their attention elsewhere? Are they agitated or irritable? What are the points that concern them? At what point do they chime into a specific topic within a meeting? These are the kind of subtleties that we as humans, we've been processed and evolved to kind of understand. That's the basis of all of our relationship network. And I think slowly as the technology gets better, that's not necessarily going to be an obstacle for us. But in the short term, definitely and this goes back to community. We need to have much more of this interaction with one another, and we need it very much as an essential need as human beings. So whilst we might be able to, say, strap on a headset and manipulate virtual objects in 3D, while that's an exciting idea for us as designers, nothing can replicate people being in the same room together and having the honesty and the openness of a communication face-to-face.
That's great. Go on, Nick, give us your thoughts. Virtual collaboration versus face-to-face.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that collaboration is probably the type of work which can least well be done virtually. And the need is to get back into a room, work together, collaborate genuinely together, but of course not too close together. That's the difficulty that we're facing. And other types of work I think can be done virtually far more effectively than creative, collaborative, scrum working. Of course, those methods will probably change. We'll get better at coping, but I think the use of space is a really good question. And to Chaya's points, is it going to be more spaced out desking? Is it going to be collaboration only? These are big open questions, and in a way the best we can do is to build in flexibility. I think when we think about the floor plate and how we furnish it and how we equip it, to have flexibility to meet the needs as we go forward, it seems to me one of the few things we can do, knowing it's the right move. Lots of things might be right, they might not turn out right, but to have flexible systems for meeting, maybe for dividing up rooms so you don't build meeting rooms which are too small to really practice distancing anymore. But we might have a flexible system to enlarge or shrink a room. So my office here, and yes, I'm in the office because we're manufacturing and we're following the guidelines, and someone's got to kind of be here and open up and lock up. This office is too small for a meeting under current regulations, but it's unnecessarily big just for myself. So it'd be far better to have some kind of flexible zoning system going forward. But I also conscious Basia is urgent to bring some points in here.
Oh, yes. So the research shows that collaboration needs to be productive. So just having people mingling in an open space is not necessarily bringing the right results, and it's damaging productivity. So, and of course, it's a health risk now. So collaboration online and virtually is actually bringing the right people at the right time to collaborate on a certain topic, which is in the end as proactive and has the same results as meeting in a normal physical meeting room. And yes, at some point people will want to meet and collaborate in person, but then we can just take all of the meeting rooms we already have, and if the meeting room was previously fit for 10 people, we can now accommodate 5 within it, and it will be all right. So yeah.
I think the other thing that I see is the I think with technology we can often enable the intentional collaboration, that the meeting when we want to discuss a subject, we want to bring people together and discuss something, but it's the spontaneous, those coffee point moments, those water cooler moments, whatever you call it, when you bump into someone who's probably not in your team and how's it going, you know, the person to person, human to human discussion that often we also see a different solution which otherwise we may never have uncovered.
I want to challenge you guys because I worked a lot with a lady called Dr. Fiona Kerr, who's on a couple of TED Talks. Microsoft mentioned her last week about the fact that how you need to have human contact to actually create this, to get the stimuli in your brains, the spindle neurons and everything else. And Fiona and myself have had a number of huge arguments about this, because I don't believe you have to be physically together to actually have real good collaboration. And I proved that by me and another friend who lived in New Zealand, and I'm over here, and we wrote a poem together over a couple of weeks. It's about the people and the personality. Yeah, the technology today is not its best, but if you can see the rise and see the reactions, you start to see a lot more. It's not the bestest. You can probably get as much when you meet physically, but you cannot say you cannot collaborate over technology, because it does work. But people, when you've been brought up wearing a blue shirt all your life, and you say now you have to wear a green shirt, then it goes, oh, I can't do that, it's not going to work. But if you've been brought up with a green shirt all your life and you say now you have to wear a green shirt, you go, yeah, okay. It's between your ears that it really matters. It's how you adapt yourself to these things. And because we're going through this crisis, we can't say it's not going to work. What we have to turn around and say, well, let's try it. Let's be more honest. And if somebody goes, I don't think you're paying attention, you actually turn around and say to them, instead of just going, oh, well, whatever. you have to be more involved, and maybe you have to build some extra characteristics up to do that and take on your own self-leadership. So if you can work together, if you're here or there, I mean, I live in Sweden, but nobody knows I live in Sweden because I'm always connected, whether I'm talking to New Zealand, Australia, New York, Seattle, San Francisco. I'm usually here now, or in the garden because I can go in the garden. But I mean, it's the same. So it's really getting down to anybody who says it can't be done is then putting down another line that I can rip down and say it's not true. You have to adapt to it.
Nobody knows you're in Sweden apart from the 5 of us in our audience, but we'll keep that quiet between us. Yeah.
Sorry, can I
Yeah,
add something? I fully agree, George. The technology is bringing us all together, and yes, it's not perfect, but as we were all thrown into the deep waters of digital meetings, as so many people are using the current software, and they will all provide the companies who provide them with feedback, that means we will see the development of user experience and the way that we use these platforms much quicker, and it will, in the end, we will get used to it as we use them, and it won't be that big a difference between a meeting in person and a virtual meeting in the end.
As I mentioned yesterday, my 84-year-old mother sitting in Scotland Zooms me. She's Zooming me. And a few years ago, she couldn't even pick up. Well, she can't use an iPhone, but she can Zoom on her iPad. And that's because she can't meet anybody. She's locked in. I mean, we're talking almost every other day. We're talking more now than ever before, which is also another consequence of this virus.
I can see the same thing. Like we are now calling more people than we would actually go and see, because you don't have to commute to the center or even go to another country. You can just meet anyone at any time.
There's one factor that I would just like to bring to everybody's attention here, and Georgia, it relates to, like, say, you communicating with your friend in New Zealand. I suspect that maybe you knew this guy in advance and you had like a person-to-person, face-to-face contact. I think that is terrific, but a lot of the time what we're talking about in communication strategies is we're talking about communicating with people that we already have a relationship with. So if we're talking about it from an organizational point of view, and we're wanting to nurture communities within a business, it's we can't just leverage the fact that we've got an organizational structure that's here, we've got a set amount of employees, and for a period of time, or at least part of the time, they could just need to get used to a virtual level of communication rather than a face-to-face level of communication. What is more difficult is if you try and take an organization that has a fewer number of employees, like say the 5 of us. If we were to have an organization which scaled up to like 30 or 40 employees, those are 30 or 40 employees that we need to have interaction with. And part of that interaction needs to be face-to-face. And I don't believe that technology can truly replicate. It's a tool like any other. And in some cases, that tool is going to become indispensable. And when we're, say, working from home, that tool is dispensable for us to see each other, to retain our sense of sanity, collaborate and work together. But it's when you're looking at inducting somebody new within an organization, there needs to be that kind of friction of working together, getting out a piece of paper, sketching something, making a mistake in your sketch, but that sketch becoming another happy accident. I believe a lot of that, you can call it magic if you like. I'm a real passionate advocate of that. I'm saying that it can still happen within the context of a remote working environment, but that's largely dependent upon the quality of the relationships that you have. And the relationships are developed over a period of time, and they don't just take place virtually. They need to take place on a face-to-face basis.
Great, thanks, Rob. We've just come into the last few minutes. I've just got a great question in from Anna discussing well-being, and I think the whole topic we've been thinking about the distributed workforce, people having the ability to work from home, the employers and businesses allowing that to happen. But Anna's asking, is that going to mean we're going to move less, or are we going to become less healthy if we're all working from home? Any thoughts on that, Rob?
I would say that depends on what your working style is. And again, this goes back to organizational culture and trust of your employees. If people are going to be working from home more, maybe working 9 to 5 just doesn't suit you. You know, not everybody is at their most productive in the morning. My wife is a bit of a night owl, and she has her most productive working time between, say, 7 o'clock in the evening and 2 o'clock in the morning. That's just how she functions and how she operates. You know, you scale that up towards, say, what other people's responsibilities are. And this is going back to families and communities. If you've got kids and you need to pick them up at a certain time, you don't want to feel guilty about leaving the office in the middle of the day just so you can fulfill your responsibilities as an adult. Having the freedom and the agency to do things in the way that you want to do them means that if something is important to you, like fitness, health, well-being, definitely these are things that you can incorporate into your life. And even though we're working in a distributed manner at the moment, we have regular updates from our health and well-being team. They make lots of recommendations, not only recommendations, but we're actually doing activities together. And it's important for us, not just from a physical point of view, but also from an emotional well-being point of view, because these are the kind of things that we're looking at as a substitute for us being in the office together, laughing, joking, having a cup of coffee together. We need to replicate as many of those moments as possible for this period that we're working temporarily from home, but also if people are going to be working in a distributed manner and by themselves in the future, that's going to be integrated as part of the working cycle.
And it's not just the physical health, it's the mental health aspects.
Yeah.
This as well. And in fact, this over the last 6 weeks, the mental health discussions is actually bigger than the physical part. Again, it's got to do with leadership. To build on what you're saying, Rob, the leadership discussion has to come into play. If you're a manager contra a leader has trusting people. I mean, we've worked with this a long time, you know, being able to have a more flexible work. The challenge is if you've got no self-control. Some people just become workaholics and work forever, like I used to be, and that's a challenge. So discipline and help and guidelines come into play. So I think, you know, one of the things that will come out of this consequence will come out of this is, I believe that HR as we know it today disappears and it turns into something else. And it becomes, there will be probably a talent perspective, but the actual idea of a workplace group, which works both with technology, people, mental health, communication, and driving that to help people both in the office, out the office, in flex spaces and travel spaces and flex time and everything else, the omni-channel of workplace. That group of people will come up and start to help people feel better and work in a better way.
I fully agree. And one example of how a company can imitate these little interactions that we are missing now for our mental health to meet with our colleagues is that there was a virtual software company that developed a piece of code that allowed random people to connect at a certain time every day so they can collaborate with a person they probably don't know and just have this human interaction and learn something about the other people, apart from the daily meetings for work-related reasons.
That's a great final thought. I think we're just out of time now, Basia, but human connection. So that's the final thought for today. Thanks you so much for joining us, everybody. And thanks too to the panelists. Thanks to Rob Atkinson from IA Interior Architects, to George Muir from Udal, Cuain, and to Nick Baxter and Basia Dzaman from Spacestor. I wanted to briefly touch on the Insights Live series that Spacestor is running. We have another similar panel discussion next Tuesday. Please join us to hear about some of the thoughts that our next panel has around the future of the workplace following COVID-19. So you can see the names on the screen there: Philip Perret from Gensler, Adrienne Rowe from Merck, and Andy Swan from MAT Studios, discussing a very similar subject. Join us next week. And I think we're going to launch a quick poll now just to get your thoughts on a couple of questions that we'd like to see your viewpoint on. Thank you so much to everyone for participating, for joining in, for asking some great questions, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe and stay positive. Thanks all and goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you to Rob and to George.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.